What is art? I mean, really. It sounds like such a simple question, right? But believe it or not, it's a mystery that's had some of the smartest people in history scratching their heads. So today, we are going to dive headfirst into this puzzle. Why is defining art so unbelievably hard? And what does that whole debate actually tell us about creativity itself? Okay, to really get to the bottom of this, let's kick things off with a little story, a tale of two artworks. Now, these two pieces could not be more different, but somehow they both get slapped with that same label, art. So on one hand, you've got a classical sculpture. You know the type. It's just obviously beautiful. You can see the incredible skill that went into it. And on the other hand, you have Marcel Duchamp's Fountain from back in 1917, which is, well, it's literally a urinal that he signed and stuck in a gallery. And the crazy part? Both of them are considered total landmarks in the history of art. So, what gives? What's the one rule, the one definition that could possibly tie together this masterpiece of classical skill with a random piece of factory-made plumbing? This, right here, is the absolute core of the mystery. Let's dig into how philosophers first tried to crack this code. All right, so for a really long time, the big goal was to find that one perfect single definition for art. And three major theories came out of this. And honestly, at first glance, they all sound pretty solid. So the first big idea, and this one goes way back to Plato, was that art is just imitation. It's a copy of the world. So a painting of a horse? That's art, because it looks like a real horse. A sculpture of a person? Art, because it represents a real person. Pretty simple, right? Well, not so fast. Here's the catch. That definition is just way too broad. I mean, think about it. The diagram of an engine in your car's manual. That's a representation of reality for sure, but you're not going to frame it and hang it on your wall, are you? This theory ends up calling a whole bunch of stuff art that, well, clearly isn't. Okay, so plan A, copying reality, didn't quite work. So what about plan B? Let's talk about emotion. The next huge idea was what we call the expressive theory, and it basically says art is anything that gets a feeling across. You know, a song is art because it makes you feel happy or sad. But you guessed it, this definition also casts a net that's just too wide. Think about a baby crying. That's about as powerfully expressive as it gets, right? But we don't record it, frame the sound waves, and call it a masterpiece. So once again, the definition just pulls in way too much of everyday life to be all that useful. All right, attempt number 3. Let's just forget about copying reality, forget about emotion for a second, and just look at the thing itself. This is what we call formalism. The idea here is that art is all about the arrangement of its parts, the lines, the shapes, the colors. If it's got a form that's pleasing or powerful, that's what makes it art. And I bet you can already see where this is going. What about a really well-designed chair? Or even an elegant hammer? They definitely have formal properties. They've got lines, shapes, a very specific structure, but they aren't art. So you can see the pattern here. One by one, all of these classic definitions kind of fall apart as soon as you poke at them a little. Okay, so now let's jump to the moment in history when this, philosophical problem just exploded out of the textbooks and into the real world. This is the point where artists didn't just bend the rules, they pretty much lit them on fire. I mean, for hundreds of years, the basic ideas kind of held up. In the 1700s, we even got a nice tidy list of the fine arts, painting, sculpture, music, the usual suspects. But then the early 20th century happened. The avant-garde movement just burst onto the scene, and these artists were deliberately making stuff just to break every single definition people had come up with. And this is the real kicker. When Duchamp picked that urinal for his piece Fountain, he chose it because it wasn't beautiful. It had zero interesting aesthetic qualities. He didn't make it, so there was no skill involved, and it definitely wasn't expressing some deep emotion. Its entire purpose was to break all the rules and ask one simple question: what now? So, as you can imagine, this artistic revolution just completely shattered the old philosophical landscape. And what grew out of the rubble were two major competing camps, both trying to pick up the pieces and make sense of this new world. Because suddenly, the whole question shifted. It wasn't about what does art look like or what properties does it have anymore. The new, much trickier question was, how does something even become art in the first place? And this leads us to two big modern answers. On one side, you've got the conventionalists. They say it's all about context. Something becomes art because the art world, galleries, critics, artists, decides to call it art. But on the other side, you still have aesthetic theories. They argue, no, it's still about the object's purpose. It's made to give you some kind of aesthetic experience. Now, this first idea, often called the institutional theory, is actually a great way to explain fountain. It works. It's art because an artist put it in a gallery and the whole art world system said, okay, we'll consider this. But this theory runs into a huge and kind of funny logical problem. See, when you try to nail down the terms, you just end up running in a circle. Check this out. An artist is someone who makes art. Okay, a work of art is something presented to the art world, right? And the art world is the place for presenting art made by artists. Whoops, we're right back where we started. We haven't actually defined anything. It basically just boils down to art is whatever the art people say is art, which doesn't really help us much. So that's the problem with the institutional theory. It's circular. But what about the other side? Well, the modern aesthetic theories have their own issues. If art is just anything made for us to have an aesthetic experience, what about a beautifully designed sports car? Or a perfectly manicured lawn? I mean, they kind of fit that definition, right? And at the same time, a theory like that is way too narrow to ever explain something like Duchamp's urina. So, okay, after this whole wild ride, where does that leave us? Are we just stuck with no answer?
Well, maybe. Or maybe the real point is that we've been asking the question in the wrong way all along.
There's a philosopher, Kendall Walton, who I think just nailed it. He pointed out that when you look at all these wildly different definitions, you have to wonder if everyone is even talking about the same thing. You know, is the person who says art is about form really arguing with the person who says art is what the institutions say it is? Or are they just describing two different corners of this massive, messy, wonderful thing we call art? And maybe that's the big reveal. Maybe the hunt for one single, timeless definition was always going to fail. And you know what? That's not a failure at all. In fact, it might be the most important clue we have. It shows us what art is. It's not some static thing you can pin down in a dictionary. It's a living, breathing part of human culture that stays alive precisely because it's always changing and pushing its own boundaries. So let's wrap this up. The real takeaway here isn't an answer. It's understanding the question itself. We saw the old school theories, art as imitation, as emotion, as form, and how they all had holes. Then we saw 20th century art come along and just blow everything up, which left us with this modern fight between context and aesthetics. The goal isn't to declare a winner. The goal is to appreciate the debate itself. And that really brings us to the final and maybe most important point. We didn't set out to give you a neat little answer today. Instead, we wanted to give you the tools, the history, the arguments, the big questions. Because now you're ready to jump into this amazing centuries-long conversation yourself. So I'll leave you with this. What do you think makes something art?